Hi guys, welcome to the FastAPI series. So if you're interested in learning how to build APIs and RESTful APIs with FastAPIs, you're in the right place. So we're going to be going over FastAPI and how to build a blog application with FastAPI. So what are the prerequisites for this series? You would need to have basic understanding of Python, functional programming, how to use functions in Python, and how to use decorators and how to import. So we're going to be using that while building our application. Also, you're going to need a code editor like PyCharm or VS Code, and you're also going to be needing PostgreSQL, or should I say pgadmin. So no fast API experience is required for this series, as that's what you're going to be learning in this series. So what are the objectives of this series? So at the end of the series, the goal is for you to be able to build a REST API with fast API. You're also going to be going over integration of database and caching services like in-memory databases like Postgres and Redis for caching. And you're also going to be testing with PyTest. And lastly, you're going to be deploying with Docker and with ACS. So as you can see, this series kind of takes you through the entire cycle of how to build a fast API and also how to prepare your fast API application for production. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright guys, welcome back. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be installing. Alright guys, welcome back. So now we're going to be installing our packages that we need to develop our application. As you can see, I've created my virtual environment here. And now let's get started. So I'm going to start by pip installing FastAPI. And I'm also going to be adding Uvicorn, which is going to be my server for this project. So also I want to include SQLAlchemy, which is an ORM I'm going to be using to create my database models and also make my database queries. And G2, which is basically an extension that's going to allow us to connect to Postgres. We're also going to need to include that. And I'm also going to be including Python underscore settings. So Python underscore settings will allow us to configure settings for our application. So you're going to see how I'm going to use Python underscore settings to create configuration files for my application. So what we're going to do now is we're going to install all these dependencies. So it seems I have a mistake here. Good. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video and just wait for all these packages to be installed. Then we get started. Alright, it seems like all our packages and all our dependencies have been installed. So now I'm going to start by checking if my application actually works. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a fast API project. So I'm going to say app.py. So now I'm going to start by importing Uvicorn. Then I'll say from FastAPI import FastAPI, and app is going to be equals to FastAPI. So now I'm going to write the code to kind of start my development server. So I'll start by saying if name equals name, then let's go. So I'm going to say uvicorn.run. So I'll need to specify where my app is as the first argument, which is basically my app type. So I'm going to specify this as app. So app is the name of my file and the name of my FastAPI application, which is my variable here, app. So that's what I'm referencing. So I would also need to specify an host. Okay, sorry. Host, which will be I would want to use my local host. So I'm going to do 00.0.0. So I think this kind of works fine. So another thing we can do is we're going to specify our port, and I'm going to use 8080 as my port for my application. So I can then say reload equals to true. So what reload equals to true is going to do is that every single time we make a change in our application, Uvicorn is going to restart the server. So to check if this actually works, I can then start by saying python app.py. Okay, as you can see, it says that our application is started. So this is more like a confirmation that our application works. So now what do we need to do? So I want to create my configurations for my application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file which will be my .env file. So I love if I say .env. So I want to store my database credentials here because in this part of the video, we're getting started. We're preparing our app for development. So one of the things we need to do is set up our database. So I'm going to have my database, and I want my database to be db_name. So I'm going to name this my database name to be fast blogger, and I would want to give a username of, I would say, admin, and I think a password of, okay, I would give it a password of admin also, since we're just in development also. So with this, I would need to then use my environmental variables in my application. So to use your environmental variables in your application, in some situations, you might need to call os.env.get, or you might need to use .env, but FastAPI makes it easier for us. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my config.py. So in my config.py, I'm going to say from Python_settings import base settings. So if you're kind of used to FastAPI, normally what you're going to do is from Python import base settings, but base settings is now from Python_settings package, so you don't import base settings directly from Python. So this is a new development that comes to FastAPI. So let's create our settings class. So I'm going to say class settings, and I would want class settings to inherit from base settings. So with this, I will then create my config and call it class config. And with this, I'm going to specify my env file. So my env file is going to be type string, and I will then specify it to be .env. So with this simple setup here, our environmental variables can basically be seen anywhere in our applications. So while you've kind of defined this, you also need to define the name of these environmental variables in your config file. So to do that, I'm just going to go underscore here. I'm under here, and I'm going to define the names. So I'll say db_name, which will be string, and I'm going to say db_username, right, which is going to be string, and I'm also going to say db_password, which is going to be string. So one of the things you need to do is you need to make sure that the names here are kind of correct. And what I mean by that is you should not have a situation where something here is spelled wrongly. So the spellings, the capitalizations, just ensure they are the same so you don't encounter problems later on. So that's that. So now I kind of want to make the settings available in the entire lifetime of my app. So how do I do this? A simple way to do this will be to say def get I would say def get settings, and I can say settings is going to return I can say settings is going to return settings. So I will then return settings. So what this is going to do is it's going to return an instance of settings for me. So anytime I kind of need to use db_name, db_username, db_password in my application, I can just call from config get import get settings. So that kind of works. So I'm going to do something now. Every time I call get settings, a new instance is going to be created in my application. I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to use LRU catch. So from functools import LRU catch. So I'm going to wrap the LRU catch decorator. So what this ensures is that it catches the instance that's been created, and every time this is called, it returns that instance rather than having to create a new one. So that's how that works. Now, while we have this, we then realize that we need to connect our application to our database, which is where we're getting to, which is what this first part of the video is targeted at. You're getting started, you want to create an application that will connect to a database because your application has to make requests. So let's go over that. So to create our PostgreSQL database, we're going to be using Docker Compose. So what this ensures is that when you're working with different type of teams and you need to have the same type of database, you can decide to use a Docker Compose database rather than having to create your database on your local machine. So first, I'm going to do Docker Compose.yaml. So this is going to create my Docker Compose file. So I want to specify my version. Okay, it seems Docker is still giving me suggestions. Docker Compose.yam. Normally I do get suggestions when I use this, so good. So I would say 3.8. And I also want to start by declaring my services. Then I would say Postgres. Postgres is the name of the service I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be telling Docker to pull the image Postgres. So this is going to kind of like pull the latest. So I can give my container name to be blogger container. I think this kind of works well, and I'm going to have restart to be always. And I also want to declare my environment. So what this means is that I kind of want to declare what my environmental variables would be while trying to create this, because when we're trying to create our application and when we're trying to create our database, so we might need to specify the name of our database, the user, and the password in our Docker Compose file. So rather than just exposing the name of your passwords and basically sensitive information here, what you can do is you can just have this in a .env file here. Docker Compose is going to recognize it, so you can make use of that. So having this .env file gives us an advantage in our application. So now let's start by saying my Postgres database, which is going to be Postgres underscore DB. So Postgres underscore DB. I'm also going to declare Postgres underscore user. And lastly, I think I'm also going to have Postgres underscore password. So what's going to be our Postgres DB? But our Postgres DB is going to be the name of our database here, which is FastBlogger. So one way to do this is I'm going to use a $sign. Sorry, I'm going to use a $sign and a curly braces. Then I put the name of my environmental variable here. So I can say with this, I can have DB underscore name. So I can then go over here and to other places of my app. So what I'll need to do is then edit this. Remember to ensure that the names here, DB underscore username, DB underscore password, are similar with the names that you have here. Otherwise, you're going to have an error. So DB underscore username and DB underscore password. So that does that. So lastly, we need to specify our port mappings for our project. So I'm going to specify my port mappings to be port. I want my application to run on my Docker container to run on port 6000, and it's going to be mapped to 5432. So if we're all aware by now, PostgreSQL runs on 5432 by default. So we can then map our port 6000 to 5432. So with that done, we kind of need to build this Docker Compose container. So how do we do that? One way of doing this is say Docker Compose up. So this is going to fetch the Postgres image and it's going to build our container image with our database application in it. So once we have that done, we then connect to our database with pgadmin. So now I'm going to build my application. So in some situations, you can see people run Docker Compose on up and they specify -d. So what this -d kind of means is that it means that you're trying to start your Docker container in a detached mode. What that means is that once you run this, you still have access to your interactive shell and you're not necessarily seeing the logs. But I kind of want to see the logs of everything that is happening while this is being created. So I'm not going to include this and I'm just going to say Docker Compose up. So now that I've run this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wait a few moments for my container to be built. And once that's done, we then resume. I then show you how to connect the Docker Compose container you've created to your pgadmin server. So I'm going to pause the video now. Alright guys, so it seems that I kind of ran into a problem while trying to create Docker Compose up. So it says bind for 0.0.6000 port is already allocated. So I guess I must have tried to I must have a container that I've probably created somewhere else that's probably binded to this port. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to 8000. So once I kind of have this at 8000, I'll then clear this and then rebuild. So changing this is going to kind of like solve the problem for us. So once we change it, it then recreates our container. Okay, as we can see, that means that our container has basically been created and started quickly. So now let's try and connect our Docker container to Postgres. Okay, let's get to the process of connecting to our database. So I'm going to go to the server. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to register a new server. And to register this, I can give the server any name. I can say Blogger. I can say Blogger server. I can go to parameters. I can go to SSH. So I can go to my connection here. I'll need to specify the address. I'm going to specify this as localhost. I'm going to specify my port to be 6000. For the maintenance database, you don't need to change this. Leave it just the way it is. So I'm going to say username admin, password admin. So I'm going to save this, and this is going to, okay, it says unable to connect, password authentication field for user admin. So it seems we kind of made a mistake somewhere. Let's go back and check. db underscore password admin. DB name is fastblogger. So I don't think there should be a mistake anywhere. Let me see. Did I get the spell correctly? Okay, it seems like I got my port wrong. It should be port 8000. So I'm going to save that. And yes, this is going to create a connection to our database. So if I see databases here, we can then see that I add my fastblogger database, which has already been created. So let's go back and connect our FastAPI application to our database. So to do that, we need to use SQLAlchemy. So first, I'm going to create a database.py file, which is going to contain our connection details and how to connect our application. So the first thing I need to do is from SQLAlchemy, I'm going to import create engine. So which is going to be responsible for creating our database engine. Also, I would say from SQLAlchemy.ext .declarative. So I'm going to import declarative base. So these are kind of conventions you need to use when you're trying to connect your application. So lastly, I'm going to say from SQLAlchemy.orm import session maker. So I see that that's kind of good. Now we also need our okay, before I say we need our configuration details, let me show you something. So I'm going to say from config import. I'm already doing it anyways, so I didn't want to import this at first, but let's get to it anyways. So first, to connect our application, we first need to create our database engine. So that'll be engine equals to create engine. So create engine is kind of expecting a database URL here, which is a string, as we can see. So what I can do is I want to create my database string. So I'm going to say db underscore URL is going to be equals to f strings. So I'm going to use PostgreSQL, which is a PostgreSQL URL. So PostgreSQL, and I'm going to put a column and 2 forward slashes. So with this, I can then put in my credentials. So what I want to do is this. I'm going to say settings equals get settings. So what this is going to do is it's going to take my configuration settings and kind of pass it to this settings variable. And with this, I can then get access to my environmental variables. So let's get started. It seems I kind of spelled settings wrong here. So good. So first I'll start by putting my username. So that'll be settings.db underscore name. Yes, db underscore name. So in case you're kind of having red or something in your VS Code editor, it means you kind of have something wrong or incorrect, unless that's the type of theme you're using. So please take note of that. So I'm also going to have a colon, which is going to follow my db password next. So I will say my settings, right? Settings dot db underscore password. So this is basically adding my password to the connection string, and at, which is going to be the server my database instance is running. So I'm going to specify this to be localhost, and we're running on port 8000, right? And forward slash. So I would need to put a link to my database. So that'll be settings.db underscore name. So this is basically how you kind of create your connection string. And with this, you can pass in this connection string here. So you then pass in this to be db underscore URL. So we can then create a sessions and say session local equals session maker. And what we're going to say is we're going to say auto comment. No, I would say yes, auto flush will be false. I don't want auto flush. Auto comment will also be equals to false. And I'm going to specify my bind to the engine, my bind, which will be the engine itself. So I hope that's clear, and if you have any questions, just drop it in the comment section. So base is going to be equals to my declarative base. So how do we make use of the declarative base? We're going to see that right now. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to go to my app.py now, and I'm going to make use of all these database settings here. So I'm going to go to my app.py, and I'm going to say from database import base and comma engine. So what I want to do is I kind of want to like create everything. So to do that, I'm going to say base dot meta data dot create underscore all. Then I'll specify the bind to be equals to engine. So that is basically a simple way of doing that. So why am I doing this? I kind of want to test if my application is connected to the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new terminal, and with this I'm going to just say Python app.py. So if this works without errors, that means we've successfully connected our application to the database. Okay, so it seems that we'll kind of have a problem. It says password authentication failed for fast blogger. So it seems that there is a problem somewhere. So I'm going to go to my database.py and db underscore password, local underscore name, db underscore name. So I'm passing in db underscore name instead of db underscore username. So which is kind of why we're having this problem here. So if I run this again, our application should run smoothly. So yes, as you can see, this is kind of like giving us the confirmation that our application works well with the database. So in the next video, we're going to start by creating our database model, and we're going to be testing them with PyTest. So thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll respond to all of them. Thank you.